ITT Corporation, who was the contractor for all of the hardware for Montauk, that is for the Phoenix project, at Montauk. Also had some ongoing side projects. Brentwood, Long Island, existed for many years, actually since sometime after the turn of the century, an overseas communication system known as McKay Radio Overseas Communications. About 1966, the system was bought out by ITT. It was a huge...
Tesla, no noise communication?
No, those were standard, ordinary communication using regular transmitters. Only they had a bank of about 52 transmitters there for different frequencies. They were set up for continuing overseas communication, which was voice, which was teletype, which was fax, and everything imaginable, both black and white and color fax. The transmitter site was at Brentwood, and after it was shut down, which was in the fall of '86 when I was there on the island, we went through there and found they had been experimenting on other projects on the side, and some of the transmitters had some non-standard equipment in them. We found other non-standard equipment around, and we finally located the chief engineer of the site, who admitted that there were major changes in the installation, which he had no understanding of what they were for. They had the regular traffic, and they had direct tie-in links to ITT laboratories at Nutley, New Jersey, through dedicated phone lines direct to that site, for inputs that he had no idea what they were. He said it was totally controlled from ITT Nutley. Now, they had a parallel project going on with certain other aspects, which the transmitter site had to have a receiving site. Now, the receiving site was not in the same location. They moved it about 30 miles away to Southampton, Long Island, and there they had the gigantic receiver site, which is still essentially there. The transmitter site was demolished and converted into a industrial park, which is all you see now as an industrial park from about '87 onward. But in that site, some strange things went on, and the story of how the project came down is even stranger. Might be worth noting. We had to track back, and Preston Nicholsem was very heavy in this because he's a radio amateur, and he's in the radio amateur clubs. And he had been by that place many times, and one October night, with he, Duncan, and myself in his van, headed up to the place. He wanted to show me this vast transmitter site. He says, I don't think we can get on in there, but it's there. Well, the gates were wide open. The guards were gone. The power was off. So we drove in and drove around and wandered all through the place. And they had not yet started demolishing the main transmitter building. They had demolished some of the smaller buildings peripherally, which may have had some manufacturing facilities. We're not sure. But we went through that, saw all of the transmitters, and there were some very strange charges left on them. Eventually, of course, the amateurs were invited in to strip the place, take anything they wanted, because it would save the contractor the trouble of removing it. So the amateurs had a field day. They took down 5 towers, 120 feet high, with the rotating antennas. They saved the antennas. They took everything you can imagine. And when they were done, they still had literally tens of tons of hardware to scrap. The transmitters eventually were bulldozed, what was left of them. But we couldn't understand why this place shut down, because it was a functioning overseas communication system. Well, finally, the story filtered through from ITT Corporation's headquarters at Maiden Lane, New York, about a very strange occurrence in one night in September, actually a Saturday. ITT had planned to shut this facility down on a permanent basis because they really had a little more use for it. And that particular morning on a Saturday, they gave instructions by phone to the station master that this was to be the last day of transmission. There would be some traffic that would come through, and they would have shut down and secure the transmitter on a permanent basis. So he received his orders, and throughout the rest of the day and far into the night, the transmitter remained on, and it was receiving traffic, and nobody at the Nutley end or New York could figure out what was going on. They had orders to shut down the station, and it was not shut down. It was accepting traffic and transmitting. So they sent somebody out from New York to investigate, and he arrived that night and started to go on base and took one look and said, I ain't going on this place. The transmitter building, with all of the transmitters, which was quite a large structure, was glowing with a blue glow over it. Something which was totally abnormal. He wouldn't walk on the base. The whole, it was surrounded with gates and fences and all of this. He wouldn't go on the base at all, and he went to a telephone and called Nutley and said, there's something very strange going on here. I refuse to set foot on base because of this very weird blue glow, and it just doesn't seem normal at all. And attempts from Nutley to contact any of the personnel on the base in the latter part of the afternoon and the early evening were futile. They got no answers on the phone. So they said, okay, don't go on base. We'll come by with the crew in the morning and we'll shut down the power from the substation outside the operating area, which they did. And then they went on base. Nothing wrong, everything appearing perfectly normal. All the equipment was there. 12 people on that base earlier in the day had vanished completely and were never found. Not a trace. They finally had to tell the families that these people had disappeared. How they handled it, I don't know. But about 3 days later, they fired up the equipment to see if there's anything wrong with it. They found nothing wrong with it, whatever. Everything, piece of equipment on that base operated properly, but nobody was there. So ITT shut it down and did a little head scratching and finally says, okay, we don't have anything more to do with this place, get rid of it. So that was when the order came to sell it. They found somebody who was a developer of industrial properties, and they bought it lock, stock, and barrel for $5 million cash. They finally found out how much they paid for it. And ITT told him, you get everything. He says, we don't want all this transmitting gear. He says, you got it all. We don't want it. It's your problem. So that's when came the famous offer to the radio amateurs to come in and have at it and take anything they wanted. And they did for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then, of course, eventually everything was torn up and the transmitters were destroyed, the buildings were leveled. I was there when they were doing it. And the underground facilities, and there were some extensive underground rooms, they were so strong that they supported the bulldozers without bending at all. What they did with that, I don't know. But they eventually cleared everything, and it's now a large industrial site, and there's no trace of the old transmitter towers, the buildings, or the site. But that story was weird in that whatever was going on at that station, apparently the station or something connected with it wasn't about to be shut down. So into the blue went about 12 people, somewhat reminiscent of what happened at Montauk not too long before, except there it was a different phenomena. Well, that's some of the strange things that have turned up in Long Island in the process.
This reminds me of these additional byproducts of the Philadelphia technology way back in the 40s when seamen were disappearing off the deck of the Eldridge, and then somebody else appeared, another seaman appeared in Italy, buried in a brick wall. Then that barroom fight with crewmen that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, they were all interesting stories. The one about the barroom fight is documented. I do have the newspaper clipping finally, which documents a group of sailors coming out of, as they put it in the paper, the rear room of the barroom, fighting and engaging in a brawl, and involved themselves with the customers in the bar, and bar stools were overturned and things were damaged, and they estimated $600 worth of damage, which was quite a lot of damage in 1943. And the MPs and the SPs were called, and the police and the shore patrol hauled off the sailors, and the Navy said they would pay for the damage that was done. The only problem with the story was there was no back room in the bar. There was nothing but a wall. And it would appear that these sailors came out of the wall, probably connected with the Philadelphia experiment. We don't really know, as has never been run down for the ultimate answer as to where they came from. The other story I've heard once, and I've not been able to get any data on it, is that about the same time a sailor, an American one, turned up buried in a brick wall someplace in Italy. Quite dead when discovered, but the body was half buried in the brick itself. And this was very reminiscent of what happened on the Eldridge, where 4 bodies were buried in the steel, 2 horizontally in the deck and 2 vertically in the bulkhead walls. So the phenomenon that was created by the Philadelphia experiment in the final test was enormous, was very far-reaching, and was very, very destructive of many things. And we perhaps do not yet know the full story of what it really did. But we do know that the Navy, of course, wouldn't leave it alone. Eventually had to pick it up again in '47, which I've already outlined.